Hello. I am Lydia Borrell-Demian. I am the Secretary General of Science Europe, and I am very happy to welcome you all into this webinar on the potential of rapid evidence synthesis for environmental action. I am here surrounded by a group of experts and excellent panelists that will help us understanding what is this about and what are the perspectives for the future. I would like to thank the group of people who have been organizing this session and putting together the concept of the program, the questions, and also the selection of these speakers, especially Eldred Harrington from Cambridge University, Gabriela Verboski and Christina Imbrich from Hungarian Research Network, Stephen Davidson, also from Cambridge University, Yamin Ait Amer and Anne-Hélène Prieur-Richard from the French Research Agency, Anne Ackerman from Lund University, Rosa Battenberg from KIN Netherlands, Margarida Prado from the Foundation of Science and Technology in Portugal, and Ida Ullenberg Jensen from the Research Council of Norway. To all of them, great big word of thanks. I would like to say just a few words about the context of Science Europe. We are an organization representing national research funding and national research performing organizations. We tackle all sorts of policy research issues, and especially we like the science policy, so how science is using the results for policy development. We have a whole series of reports, you can see them on the screen, that we have been published since 2021, starting with a call to action for research organizations that we launched in 2021 in the framework of COP28, together with other university organizations. I will not go into details of that, but here you have a selection of reports made by practitioners. That means that the members of Science Europe, how do they tackle these issues regarding environmental sustainability and science for policy in this respect. In November last year, we published what we call the framework for the environmental sustainability of research organizations with 8 lines of action. You can see them on the screen. So from raising awareness to, in fact, kind of refurbishing buildings to make them more energy efficient. We want to now move on into these 2 lines of action. One is, what can research organizations do more to be more environmentally sustainable when they perform research activities, and how we go about accelerating the take-up of research results for policy development, which is the subject of today. So I would like to pass at this point the word to our wonderful chair, Eldred Harrington, for her to manage the rest of the session. Eldred, over to you.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Lydia. And it's a privilege to be here with my esteemed colleagues. I am going to be chairing a session that looks at the first step to explore the potential of rapid evidence synthesis in ensuring a fluid delivery of science-based solutions to policymakers and other stakeholders working on the mitigation of and adaptation to climate change. And we have 5 speakers today who've been asked these questions, which they will answer in their own way. First, we wanted to know what improvements are needed in the existing science policy interfaces in climate, environmental pollution, and biodiversity. Second, we wanted to know what the potential use cases for rapid evidence synthesis in environmental science might be. Then, can rapid evidence synthesis effectively support evidence-based policy action on the environment? And if that's the case, what would be the prerequisites for its successful deployment? And what are the lessons learned from other fields in which rapid evidence synthesis has been used? Finally, what are the next possible steps for decision makers, research organizations, and other stakeholders? We have a superb panel today. I will introduce them in the order in which they're speaking. So first we have Professor Dr. Daniela Jakob, Then we have Professor Emily Shuckburgh, who is commander of the British Empire just recently. Then we have Dr. Ismail Kawuya and Dr. Jan C. Minks. And finally, Dina Eparkina. And we will open up the floor to your questions later, so please have them ready. We look forward to discussing with you. But first, I want to turn the floor over to Daniela. We look forward to hearing from you, Daniela, your responses to these questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Everett, and thank you very much to Science Europe for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today with you on this webinar. I try to share my slides. I'm pretty sure it will work. So let me say a few words. I'm a meteorologist by training, and I spent 25 years in climate science, assessing the information about how local and regional weather and climate might change. And I also spent some time writing the IPCC 1.5 degree report as a coordinating lead author. But I also work at the interface to society, and here I'm leading the Climate Service Center. So this means we are working on demand, I would say, of policy and society to support them to cope with climate resilient development. Having said this, I would like to share some ideas with you from what I came across over the years in the area of science policy dialogue. And I'm really looking forward also to hear all my colleagues here in the discussion. So let me say a few words here about the baseline. So the baseline is what we mean by science policy dialogues is a production and dissemination of scientifically sound knowledge relevant to political decision-making processes. So here you have already some interesting words in it. It's production, dissemination, scientifically sound and relevant, and decision-making. So the aim is to improve political decisions through reliable knowledge. And I think there is a differentiation. Political advice is based on knowledge. Lobbying is based on interest. And I think that's really important to have in mind. Challenges are, of course, here, and you see the literature, you can look at a relationship between science and policy is complex and tense. So this all sounds good, but when it comes to practice, what happens if one side doesn't want to listen? So science policy dialogue sounds good, sounds interesting, but is it as easy as it looked like? What do we need? We need for successful scientific policy advice credibility, relevance, and legitimacy. The credibility, I think, is that what we know most in science. It's scientific quality, validity. So we work a lot on verification, validation, building a trustful base. Relevance is, of course, dependent from the context. It's a context-specific driver. And who actually decides what is relevant for answering a certain question and which scientific result is relevant. Legitimacy, I think, is really important, but it's not only, let's say, the task which you get or the status you have. It has a lot to do with the trust in the actors in the dialogue. So again, sounds good, but what do we do when it comes to a demand-oriented success? So can we trigger the uptake of scientific knowledge by can we make those stakeholders or uptakers listening to our information when we go more towards demand orientation? And for this, of course, we have very classical formats in science policy interfaces, as you know. And it's interesting now to see how rapid evidence synthesis is connecting to these formats. So we have classical communication in science, which is pushed by science. We know something and we would like to pass our knowledge to others. We can do this through papers, workshops, and so on. Then, of course, we have scientist expert functions. So we attend hearings, we are part of bodies and committees, it's a pull from the politics. So we have the push from ourselves, what we would like to communicate, but we also have a pull part by the policy side. We have very different formats, and we do have evidence maps. I think that's interesting to understand how evidence maps are related to rapid evidence synthesis. And of course, some channels are more academic, as others are more representation offices. You know all about this. I think we have a lot of success factors, so we could be very successful if we look into the slide. We made major steps forward in transdisciplinarity. I also think in the last decades, we made major steps forward in transparency and iterative processes with sufficient resources. But what is important for me and what I would like to discuss is scientific rigorousness, objectivity, and that's where IPCC is coming in. That's where the IPCC has its unique selling point, and the trust factor, which I said before. So let me have 2 more slides on rapid evidence synthesis. I must say I'm not an expert on this methodology, but we will hear later from the experts here in the panel. But I do think it is a very interesting possible alternative to many other communication tools. I think as you said, Eldred, it had a very important function in the health communications through the pandemic. I'm not so sure that it can be transferred to the topics and themes which you just mentioned, which have a very different time and space scale. So I'm interested to hear about this. I do think living evidence can be useful for what-if scenarios. So I think it's interesting to understand how the direct dialogue can feed into this rapid evidence synthesis. And my question would be, can rapid evidence synthesis support and accelerate the implementation of climate action and adaptation plans? So that's a little bit my little question, which I pass to you. And as I said, I do think there's this method, in addition and jointly with others, has a huge potential. However, I also see some deficiencies or some gaps. I'm really glad if I can learn more about it. This is, do we have standardized processes? Is it really clear what we do? And can we say with this clear and transparent and organized process, we can level up the trustworthiness? The accuracy should go before speed. At least that's what I think. That's not necessarily always the possibility if you're in a science policy dialogue. Sometimes speed is more important than accuracy. And I think what it makes it really interesting is how the robust techniques, which we already know, can feed into this. Yeah, thank you very much. This is what I wanted to give as a little impulse, and I'm really eager to go forward and listen to my colleagues here. Thank you.
Daniela, thank you so much. And also thank you for questioning the question, as it were, opening this up, true scientist. So please, I'd like Emily Shukbra to speak to this question. Emily.
Hello, and thank you again to Science Europe for putting on this really important and timely webinar. So I thought I'd start off with giving some comments that probably apply in general to evidence synthesis, but maybe are that much more exacerbated if one's thinking about how to conduct that evidence synthesis in a rapid way, because decision making obviously is going to potentially be on a shorter framework. And then I'll come on to give some examples where we've actually been trying to enact some aspects of rapid evidence synthesis. So there's 3 different things that I want to talk about. The first is about the remit of what an evidence synthesis even is about. And I think that it's quite clear that, first of all, that defining that remit is really important and needs to be done in a very collaborative way between those who are the kind of creators of evidence or the gatherers of evidence, and those people who are going to be utilizing that in a policy context. And I think to be really effective, it's best to see that as being part of a much longer process, of which the evidence synthesis is only a small part of it. And one of the reasons that I highlight that, Daniela at the start mentioned the IPCC 1.5 degree report, which many people might be aware of. That was actually came out of a recommendation from or a call from the Paris Agreement for the IPCC to produce that report. And one of the challenges in producing that report was there was actually remarkably little evidence base for it to synthesize together. And so there's something about rapid evidence synthesis can only work if it's part of a longer process of dialogue between scientists and others who are producing and gathering that evidence, and those people who might be utilizing it. And the second thing is that in terms of that defining the remit, is it is really important to have a good understanding, again, at an early stage of that production of evidence as to what the policy questions might be. The most recent, the upcoming IPCC report, the 7th assessment report, is going to have a greater emphasis on looking at risk assessment, because there's been an understanding and that previous IPCC reports, at least in terms of the physical science component of them, had a much greater emphasis on articulating the best understanding of what future climate might be, as opposed to a focus on the worst case scenarios, which in some contexts might be more relevant to policy making. So defining the remit is really important. The second thing then, of course, is how we characterize the evidence base. And again, picking up on some of the things that Daniela has already mentioned, the IPCC has been really at the forefront of trying as best as possible to articulate that evidence as clearly and as impartially as possible. But there remain really significant challenges. In general, the communication in a policy context of scientific uncertainty is fundamentally a challenging thing to do. The IPCC has long tried to characterize put that in a coherent framework, and that's gone a long way to helping to standardize the way in which that information is conveyed. But there are still challenges. It's still the case that if you say that there's a 10% chance of something catastrophic happening, or a 90% chance of it not happening, the different framings, whether it's positive or negative framings, mean that many people, including many policymakers, understand that information differently, even though it can be exactly the same scientific statement. So the framing is really important. The IPCC has attempted to standardize key phrases like very likely, and has a particular quantification in terms of the probabilistic statistical translation of that. So very likely in IPCC language means more than 90%. But again, studies have shown that if you ask people what they think very likely means in an IPCC report, they often have a very different interpretation. So that kind of communication through is important. And then finally, on the uncertainty side of things, another real challenge is that there are many different types of uncertainty. There's those uncertainties where we can produce a quantified risk, that sort of 90% probability. But there are other uncertainties which are more, in some language terminology, you might call ambiguous, where we don't know the answer because we don't know exactly what future emission scenarios might be, for example, or we don't know the answer because we genuinely have a lack of scientific understanding associated with tipping points, or there's the unknown unknowns in the Donald Rumsfeld characterization of it, for those that you remember his famous speech. How do you characterize all those different forms of uncertainty together in a synthesized way remains a significant challenge. Then the third thing that I wanted to come on to was the synthesis process itself, and where we might be able to start to accelerate that, particularly utilizing new technologies. And of course, the real opportunity that's more recently come on the scene has been the potential to use AI approaches. And I'll come on to give you an example where we have been doing that. in terms of some of the areas of climate science where that might be particularly relevant, I think the adaptation and resilience agenda, which is increasingly becoming important, is a clear example where one might want to be able to utilise some both potentially rapid or ability to create very bespoke evidence syntheses for particular challenges. So that would be, one example perhaps to have in your mind. One of the challenges with using AI, of course, is that there's lots of ethical questions associated with it. I did some work a couple of years ago with a postdoc from Cambridge, now a lecturer in Cambridge, called Ramit Debnath, where we were looking at some of those justice issues. And it's really important, I think, especially in the context of decision making that might be relevant to a very broad range of people, that those justice elements are really integrated into the evidence synthesis process itself. And so, just to name a few of them, that would involve where the evidence is coming from and making sure that it's not just sourced from particular areas. It also involves how that evidence is being distributed, who is able to access the information. And there are many, many other different dimensions associated with those justice and equity issues that I think are really important to feed into the process right from the start. Part of the solution to addressing those equity issues is not to have a purely AI-based approach. It is essential to have a human-in-the-loop component so that you can start to address some of those questions. And there are also other challenges, of course, in terms of the energy use. You might particularly be concerned about that if you're using AI approaches in the climate context, as well as technical challenges associated with those AI approaches producing hallucinations, which if anybody has started to play around with using ChatGPT or so forth, you'll have come across some examples of where that has been the case. So this particular example where we've started to create a pipeline using AI as part of that pipeline has been in terms of synthesis of conservation evidence. There's been a project in Cambridge for the last 15 years, which using humans has been creating evidence synthesis on different conservation topics. And we've now been augmenting that with an AI-based approach, actually creating a pipeline that on the one hand is using AI to help gather together the global literature on conservation topics and what works or doesn't work on particular examples in particular locations. We then have the human in the loop component that assesses that evidence base, but then there's another AI part of the pipeline that allows natural language interrogation of the evidence base. And I feel that that is a sort of pipeline that potentially could become more widespread across a whole range of different policy related topics. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. And Dr. Kouia Ismail, please, I'd love to hear from you now.
Thank you, Eldred. Again, just to introduce myself, I'm Ismail Kouia. I work for an organization called Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis, which is a knowledge brokering institution located in Uganda. So what we basically do, and core to this conversation, is we work with policymakers, decision makers at different levels of governance. That's all the way from the subnational level, national, and also at the region. And we've also gotten to have conversations with those at the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board to basically, one, improve access to improve access and availability of the evidence, but also facilitate the ability to use this evidence foremost in a timely manner during urgent situations. And that's the core part of this conversation. So what I'm going to share and talk about is a model that we have used at the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis that we call the Rapid Response Model, which is a model that goes beyond, which is a model that goes beyond just saying that you are doing a rapid evidence synthesis, but involves a process that engages a policymaker at different points, understanding the policymaker's needs, which has already been highlighted, ensuring that the evidence that you are providing is relevant, reliable, and credible. But importantly, it embeds the question of ownership and trust in this process. So what we do beyond just synthesizing evidence is ensuring that the person that we are delivering this evidence to demands it, appreciates it, and will probably use it. We also, as knowledge brokers, our role is to understand the policymaking environment, which for many of us, it's quite humbling that evidence is just one of the so many solutions, so many inputs to policymaking. And what we are trying to do is to make sure that when evidence is needed, even if it is a critical time period, even in those urgent situations, there is the evidence synthesis that provides the best available evidence is available. So I'll start off with a quote that you really, we often start off with that sort of humbles us. And it's from George Bernard Shaw. And he said, the only man who behaves sensibly is my tailor. He takes my measurements anew every time he sees me, while all the rest go on with their odd measurements and expect me to fit in. So this is really a humbling quote for us, because evidence that we are providing to a policymaker has to be contextual, has to be within the context a policymaker appreciates and understands. And quite often when we're dealing with those at different levels, at the national level, they will tell you where is the local evidence, where are the M&E reports, and here I'm already talking about the sources of evidence. What information are you giving me, and is it even related to that? So how do we then get to have all that information and ensuring that the evidence we have provided is timely, but also the best available at the time we have provided? And Emily has already highlighted, importantly, this is really part of a much longer process that we need to be aware of. The other things that I need to highlight is, and it has already been hinted on, is when we are thinking about the question of what's the evidence's role for, and it really comes to uncertainties, being able to reduce the uncertainties in what we think we know and we don't know, and whether we need this evidence. And quite often you'll find that there will always be important uncertainties to making the decision. And it is for that, it is for those uncertainties that quite often the policymaker or the decision maker comes to you. Some of these might be obvious to you. They might come with a question and ask, how does, and I come from the health field, how does this malaria drug work? And you already know about it because you're in the malaria research, and you'll be able to provide that evidence. If they're providing, for example, if we're talking about the IPCC 1.5, you already know what it is. It's quite clear, but that policymaker does not know. So there is uncertainty for them for that. But then, as you're providing the synthesis for us, the next question is, what should be potentially included in this evidence synthesis, and how should it be? We would be attracted so much in thinking that we are providing the best available. It is the randomized controlled trials, if those are applicable, should be provided. But is it what should be potential? Is it what would help the policymaker, this decision maker, reduce all the uncertainties they have? So quite often you'll find that, again, when it comes to why we do this, is that rigorous evidence is often lacking. And policymakers must make decisions whether the evidence is available. And we've had several examples where the policymakers are frank with us. They will ask you a question, they'll come up with a question that they have a meeting coming up. And if you don't give them that brief, the meeting will still happen and the decision will be made. they're not going to wait on you either way. So what then do you do? Are you going to wait for that systematic review that is going to be completed in the next 12 months to be able to answer that question? Or are you going to wait for that follow-up study that is still ongoing to be able to help them answer that question? Or are you going to be certain? Are you going to try and work with them, understand what exactly do they need to know now, and what information is available now that can help them reduce on that uncertainty, reduce on that, be able to answer that question so that they're more confident and the decisions that they're going to make will be much better than what they would have made had they had not that information. So so it is quite often that we do. That's the reason that we do that. But also, importantly, evidence synthesis are large. If I say systematic reviews, are large investments. They will take a longer period of time. They will have to consider quite a lot that goes in, and that is rightly important. So for what is needed to inform that. But if you to think about these day-to-day decisions, and sometimes these crises that happen at the beginning of the webinar, Aldred mentioned COVID. COVID is not going to wait. Coming from Africa, we live in a crisis after crisis. We constantly dealing with crises, and they're not going to wait. What then do you need to do? That's where the rapid evidence synthesis do come in. But also, we know that we'll be able to, they will help us reduce waste of resources, and also, as I mentioned, reduce on the risk of the unintended impact if this was not done. So how then do we do it at Acres? So at Acres, we have a demand-driven service. What that means for us is most of our work is to drive the value of evidence with a policymaker, get to that point where they appreciate the value and demand it, and own what they're asking for. So when they own it, they're able to come to us. So what you have here, who you have here is would be our policymaker. And here you would call what the service is, which in our case is called the Rapid Response Service. But then we don't deal with everything. We have boundaries within which we deal with. But right now at Acres, we've been able to open up that boundary because the methods do cut across, either with the synthesis methods do cut across, and we do appreciate that. We started from health, and right now we're dealing with questions from clean energy, questions to do with youth, questions to do with gender. So these are, as long as evidence can be synthesized and inform decisions, we're able to do it. But for us, the key part of this is that the decision needs to be made within the next 28 days. So once we appreciate and acknowledge that with the policymaker, that the decision needs to be made with the 28 days, then it falls within. If it's beyond that, we still work with them, but we're aware that it doesn't fall within the rapid response service, but there is a different synthesis product that would be helpful for them. Could be a systematic review, could be an evidence gap map, which we also do. But we're very clear about that. But then when the policymaker does come to us, there is a conversation that goes on to understand, and Emily rightly put it as the remit, to understand what is their need, what exactly do they want to know. And often these come as stories. They'll tell you about stories. We were in a meeting and we were talking about this policy that we need to do. They don't need evidence for all that policy. They need something very specific, and it is our role to get to that point that this is actually what they need to do, or this is what they need to answer. And as we do that, we also understanding the policy environment, but also understanding the policymaker. Who is this policymaker? Is he a PhD graduate? Does he have a PhD in environment science, and asking questions about environment? So we do appreciate that, so that how you then write, and that's the next thing that I will also highlight. How you then write and put this together is not just that you have put together these randomized controlled trials, this very rigorous evidence, but how you write should also be keen to answer the policymaker, should also be accessible to that. And once that is done, and once we appreciate that, we will use the methods that we do use for evidence synthesis. We will search for the evidence where it is both peer-reviewed and great literature. And at ACRES, we will not screen and say we are going to just look at 3 databases. The question is, what databases do we need to look at? And if there are 5, a group of people are going to come in and then do that. So it's that kind of effort that we do, and it is a very short time period, and the shortest we've had is 48 hours. We do bring more hands-on to make sure that we do get the best available evidence. We don't leave anything out. We will then go through the synthesis processes using the available technology tools that make it very fast, and we will hear some of those tools from one of our speakers. We'll talk about these technology tools that could help us. We'll then summarize. So once we've done that, a policymaker appreciates more what you give them than the process. What we do, because we come from a research background, we have to ensure that what we provide is the best available. We would be, and one of the things we more worry about is providing a policymaker with evidence, and he or she tells you, there is a report from the World Bank that came out and it was saying something completely different, and you did not contextualize what that actually meant with the evidence that you are providing. So we're very worried about that, regardless of the time that we are providing. And once that process is done, we then have a review process. This review process does 2 things. 1, ensuring that the methods that we've used are rigorous, and also 2, ensuring that what we are talking about, the context, is relevant to that. We are not content experts we are methods experts. We will look for the evidence, put it together, but we are not content experts. We will find the expert to help us understand what we are talking about, to ensure that when we say IPCC 1.5, we are not saying something completely different, and because we found it in texts, we feel like we have understood it, because there is that tacit knowledge, that field knowledge that is unsaid, that if you write something, even if you picked it from literature, that's not what it's actually talking about. You need you need the expert from the field to help you appreciate that. And once we do that, we then send back a product to a policymaker. Now, the products right now at ACRES are varied, and we understand the need. Like I mentioned, it's really about access. Access is not just finding where the evidence is and put it together, but how you then write it. So one of the products that I've highlighted on my left, or could be your right, is a brief, what we call a rapid response brief, that summarizes the evidence, put together quickly what are the key messages from this question or from this evidence that you would want to know. And from those key messages, what's this overall summary, a 1-pager that you will be interested in if you're a policymaker who did not have time at all, and you just want to know what's in there. But also the aim of that is to draw the person in. Once the key messages are interesting and they're insightful for what they're looking for, they'll then go to the next 1-pager. If that is also interesting, and they go to that 10 or 15-page document that provides the detail that where you would really want them to get to understand the context. But also, what this also means for us is that policymakers are not the same. A director or a permanent secretary, here in Africa, we have permanent secretaries or secretaries to education, or even a minister. They don't have the time to read the whole document, and they may give it to someone else to read it, and that person also, you need to think about that. So we write for different people, and we have to understand that. But then we've also gone ahead to improve how this is disseminated. So on my right, you'll see what we've used as Shiny apps. I'm sure many of people here use R and have used Shiny apps. So we've used this to generate these reports for a policymaker so that they are interactive. You have the report and you have something interactive that they can go with have a conversation in the meeting, something that they can have a conversation and later on be able to interact with. The whole point of this is to make sure that the evidence is available and it is engaged with. They're able to engage with it within the time that they actually have asked for. Thank you very much. I'll stop here again. In case you'd want to find more information about us and the work that we do, it's always available, and I'll be happy to have more conversation with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ismail. And now I'd like to pass to Dr. Minks. Jan, can you please take it away?
Let me just share my screen. Here, I'm just building now on what Ismail said here and talk a little bit more about also what Emily already pointed towards, a bit of the AI. So about rapid and living evidence and what role AI does play. Very briefly, just because we don't have everywhere this kind of culture, and it's highly problematic to just rely on primary evidence, because primary evidence, due to methods, data, etc., is often biased and sometimes wrong, right? So is it this guy or that guy that you're looking at? And that obviously will determine or will lead you to very different conclusions. And so we need to consider the entire evidence, but it doesn't stop there. And I think particularly in the climate and environmental community, we have not always done a good job in then doing reviews in a good way, because reviews also need methods, and I think that's not commonly accepted. And this little diagram shows us, that we should define a research question, we should have a systematic approach to what the evidence is, and then select it, and it all needs to, and then most importantly, we need to have a method for actually synthesizing this. And that's often not the case, and I think this is something that we need to change. And only in this way we can actually provide the best and most recent evidence to policymakers, and this is what they deserve. And I will talk about living evidence, and I think that's really important. That's really interesting, because I think we have always been struggling with the disconnect between the need and the delivery of evidence at the science policy interface. So it's typical that policymaker has a problem. The window of opportunity for making the decision is usually quite small. And then obviously scientists want to go away and do some research, come back 2 years later. That doesn't work. Living evidence as a paradigm basically just tries to synthesize evidence constantly and just have an updating approach. And I will talk a little bit about this more. Overall, I think there's a big case actually to think about synthesis in general, and then also to think about the challenges associated, because our knowledge, so scientific publications, are really exponentially growing. And this is a plot on the Web of Science, just publications that respond to the keyword of climate, and you have during the IPCC assessment report, there were 400,000 new studies. So this is only the Web of Science. So if you really consider everything, then you probably have, with all gray literature sources, wider related topics to climate that don't explicitly talk about it, easily a couple of million or so. And so we need to actually have methods that scale to this evidence base, even though Emily is obviously wrong. Sometimes, obviously right. Sometimes we don't have enough evidence on topics. That still evidence gaps still exist, obviously. But we also have a lot of evidence, but also a lot of poor quality evidence. So we need to control for that as well. And now the hope is that recent advances in AI, particularly large language model, can help us now to rise to this challenge. And obviously, there are many people out there, almost every week we hear now from a new tool where people are very enthusiastic and claim that you can do now a systematic review in a day or even faster. And that is all basically done by the magic of AI. But I would fully agree with Emily. Humans need to be in the loop. And I think at the moment we are a bit in a in a period of Wild West where, you know, a lot of things are possible and people are just trying. But I think what is really important here, that evidence synthesis needs to remain a scientific process, and we can use these tools. There's a lot of potentials, but we need to do it in a scientific way, and I think that is really helpful. Then we can become faster. We can, you know, do rapid syntheses in much less time, but we can also obviously have much larger potential to automate things. And it's good because the scientific community has been responding, and we have already some guidance on actually how AI can actually be used responsibly for evidence synthesis, and these are the RACE guidelines, which these in their second version come in 3 reports, and I can only recommend to people interested in this topic to check them out. The slides will be made available, as I understand, and there is a QR code that you can look. We are also working on this, so we have now a large research project that aims to make evidence synthesis faster, cheaper, and living, but in a responsible way. The project is called Digital Destiny, Digital Evidence Synthesis Tool Innovation Yielding Improvements in Climate and Health. And there we want to co-develop a new generation of digital evidence synthesis tools based on the most recent advances in AI, and basically show that they can deliver for policy. So really create impact on the ground, and that we can do this in a responsible way. So we are creating new digital evidence synthesis tools that basically help us to do these things faster. But a very important component of this project is that we responsibly use them, so that we engage in the evaluation of these tools and design processes that allow us to apply them safe and responsively, and without eroding our methodological standards. We will also do some mainstreaming so that people can actually, that we improve literacy around AI, and you know, mainstream, you know, robust processes, etc., etc. But yeah, this is something we do. I brought one example because I was told to be brief, and this is a piece that we've done and was actually taken up in the 6th assessment report by the IPCC, and I think it's the nicest example in the field of kind of evidence mapping, where we actually address the problem that, you know, we still have limited evidence on attribution. And what we did here was to basically bring together information from climate change attribution models on a grid-based level with studies on observed climate impacts that are really plentiful, to basically synthesize this and show that we can actually, in a quite powerful way, can show that climate impacts can be observed already around the globe. And they are documented for 80% of the land surface, where 85% of the world population lives. And I think it's a very powerful result, because it shows us actually that more or less everybody in the world is already observing, witnessing, feeling the consequences of climate change. And this was quite prominently brought up. Actually, when the study came out, Barack Obama cited it at when he went to the COP, which was really nice, and showed us also that this actually is something that is relevant. And this map is AI driven, and we have a pipeline where we can update it whenever we like. So I want to close again on what I started out with, living evidence. So let's be efficient. Rapid and living evidence to support evidence-based decision making. And this is, you can see how I think we should do things in the future, rather than on the top, rather than pushing up the rock all the time again, the hill with a systematic review or an evidence synthesis piece, and then often already at the point of publication, things being a little bit outdated, and then basically the products using their value over time. Let's just push the rock up the hill once and then just keep it there, keep it updated, keep it living, and then the evidence will also be there when policymakers need them. There are lots of things that make this really complicated, but I still think it's a very appealing vision of how we can think of our evidence base in the future. And I want to close with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jan. And Dina, now please take the floor.
Thank you very much. I found all talks really exciting and interesting. I've been taking notes myself. Thank you, Eldred, for the opening, and hello, everyone. So I'm Dina Iparkina. I work for EuroGOOS, European Global Ocean Observing System. It is a European component of GOOS, which is a program of Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, dedicated to global observations. In EuroGOOS, just to give you an idea of who we are 48 national agencies collecting data, observations, doing marine research, meteorology, hydrography in 19 countries, but we also have a community through our regional observing systems and networks of observing instruments, which totals in about 140 or more organizations. Our main goal is to observe the ocean, deliver data services, deliver forecasts, and satisfy the needs of all sorts of users. So for us, of course, rapid evidence is a very interesting concept, and I think there is a lot that we can also bring, but also learn from other disciplines, and that's why it's so exciting to be in an interdisciplinary panel like that today. When we deal with ocean observations, we work in a vast system, dynamic system, but also largely unknown. But at the same time, it is vital to solving climate, biodiversity, and pollution crises. And while Jan showed this beautiful map of how we are affected by climate changes, climate breakdown, a lot of it is in the spots in the ocean, right? This global ocean, which covers majority of our volume of the Earth and also of its surface. So what does rapid response mean in this context? And rapid for who defines the rapid? I really was interested to hear what others think, Daniela and Ismail, how to contextualize rapid. Is it for policymaker, for citizen, and what is rapid for science? Of course, this is an issue for us as scientists. We need real-time or near real-time ocean data for a growing number of things, and these are constantly evolving. We have marine heat waves, we have coastal flooding, pollution events, ecosystem shifts. But information is not the same as understanding, and understanding is not always actionable knowledge. We all agree on that. So that's why rapid evidence synthesis and these frameworks will help us in ocean observing and forecasting community to see how we can shorten frames, not only in responding to the users of whom I've talked, but to reframe how we match observations to decisions. So in a science policy interface, and we are working in this interface in EuroGOOS, we look at those kind of interfaces and responses, not necessarily as events, but as social processes. So we are thinking of co-construction with our users of what those responses are, and also creating a shared baseline of understanding of where we are coming from, what we are talking about. We need social economic integration, which is still unachieved currently, and we see in lots of climate response, for example, that the ocean is not taken into account, and land systems, including socioeconomic systems, are not properly accounted for. Yet ocean is the driver of climate change, and also one of the biggest ecosystems suffering from it. We also need to talk about uncertainty. That's a very exciting topic, and not only from the point of view of reliability or non-reliability of uncertainty, but also as a proof of scientific rigor. Uncertainty shows that science can be trustworthy, because not everything can be always known. So I really like this Ismail's approach on case studies. I think it's really interesting because these are also storytelling kind of examples which can help contextualize and understand what we are really talking about in our own experiences and paradigms. And then to place it on the ocean observing side, ocean observing and forecasting side, in the policy and digital landscape of European Union, in the context in which I am working, we have a new European Union Ocean Pact, which was announced recently at the UN Ocean Conference, which was hosted by France and Costa Rica in Nice just over a week ago. And there, this is a coherence instrument, which is very interesting. We will need a lot of response to that because we need a lot of synthesis for that to see how all different directives and laws and communications of the European Commission, which are linked to environment and marine environment in particular, can be addressed in a synergetic way and can be optimized in terms of how we respond to this. So in the EU Ocean Pact, for instance, we have a call for a cost-effective and standardized ocean observing system in Europe by 2027, and with better sea basin coordination. We also have European Mission Ocean and Waters, which is calling for data-driven ocean restoration and innovation. And we have a digital twin ocean, which is being busily constructed by my colleagues in ocean observing and data services, which aims to stimulate ocean processes for predictive policy testing. But at the same time, over 50% of world's ocean observations are maintained by the US. And you know there are drastic cuts in this capacity currently. And over 80% of Europe's digital infrastructure is relying on foreign digital services. So to make rapid evidence synthesis work, we need sovereign and sustained observing systems for our ocean. We need open and findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And we need system integration between observing governance, marine science funding, platforms, modeling, and policy needs. There is another point, which is also really interesting, is the use of AI. And I was really interested about these examples. This is very strong potential in ocean observing for sure, from identifying plankton to spotting all sorts of anomalies. And we have great examples in European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, ECMWF, which is behind the Climate and Atmospheric Services of Copernicus program of the EU. They are using AI for improving their model capacity and model production forecasting. But it is only as good as the data it is trained on. And this is very important, in particular for oceanography, because our data is much patchier than in meteorology. It is much more complex, much more multidisciplinary, multi-platform, letting alone the governance and funding of those observing systems. So human oversight is absolutely paramount. And that, of course, is an important aspect for us to consider in the RES concept. Then we have ethics, we have data quality, and we have, of course, interdisciplinary connection, which should be strengthened between ocean science and data science. And that I think there is a big gap still there to explore. At UNOC, I mentioned UNOC 3 in Nice. There was a lot of focus on ocean observations. I think for us as a community, it's important to see this policy recognition that we can't really advance in marine science and response on environmental threats we're experiencing without ocean observations. And that was good to see. And also, I don't know if you were there in Nice, but those who were would take a tram to go from different locations of the conference. You would hear ocean noises on the tram. That was very nice to have this public engagement. But how can we make science louder, beyond the tram noises in Nice trams during the UNOC week? For that, we promote ocean literacy, but broader environmental literacy. And this is where we find that building this understanding and common knowledge that we are having, we are needing to understand what we are responding to and from where we are coming. We need to engage society and stakeholders in building this understanding. So this engagement should go way beyond the what we do in science communication, for example, or scientific outreach. So I think these are my points. I would like to maybe summarize that rapid evidence in a way is not a method, it is a mindset. And in this, for us, it is an important driver and an exciting development we can endorse in ocean observing and forecasting community. But that will require long-term coordinated observations, trust in data and the systems, and also this inclusive interdisciplinary approach that we are exploring here today. Thank you.
Magnificent. Thank you so much. I'm now going to throw the floor open to a discussion between all of our participants. I just want to remind you again to ask questions of all of our speakers, and I look forward to taking those in a bit. But first I wanted to open it up. You know, all of you are researchers, but it sounds very much like you are also having to be translators, that you're thinking very much about how to communicate this. And rapid evidence synthesis might be one way of doing this. But I wonder if you could talk a bit more between you about the kinds of things that you're learning from each other about this question of not just the research itself, but how it is communicated. Policy, obviously, but some other things were raised. Who can I pick on? Who would like to begin?
I can start if you like. Is that okay? So one point which Ismail said was quite interesting, and that was you mentioned we are method experts and we connect to the content experts. And I do think this is important to realize. It's very similar to what we learned in the climate services. You know, we're at the interface between climate science and the societal demand. And that was, to whom do you want to talk? And I think it's important for this, for the rapid response, rapid evidence synthesis and how to communicate it. We learned in the climate services that clients would like to talk to the scientists and not necessarily to the brokers, knowledge broker in between, whatever level they have and how they feel. And if you now say, Ismail, you are connecting the method expert with a content expert, who then talks? So, and what is your experience on this in the uptake? And because I'm a strong believer that not each and every scientist has to communicate themselves to every politician. I think that was a bit of a mistake which we made in the last 20 years. So maybe you can comment on this. Thanks.
Good question. Good insight. When very few scientists know how to talk, I think I would have to be frank about that. And quite honestly, it took me a long time to learn how to talk with policymakers, and I don't think I have learned that well. I'm still learning. So when it comes to scientists, they struggle a lot more. That said, there are also scientists who talk who articulate concepts and ideas very well and make them very simple to understand for policymakers, and that we acknowledge. And quite often also you'll find these scientists in so many places, talking with policymakers and different kinds of stakeholders. In our situation, or in our case, since it's a demand-driven service, and we've learned how to talk with policymakers, we talk with them about it if they ask us. But also, we do take a step ahead of that once we realize that the topic still has a lot of uncertainties around it, or there is need for that engagement, the dialogue, the deliberative dialogues. So what we do, we will engage with the policymaker and ask them if they will be interested in a deliberative dialogue for that question. Now, the dialogue now helps all these different stakeholders, including the scientists who know how to talk for the evidence, to do come on the table and have these conversations directly with a policymaker, with an aim that certain decisions might be made at that point from the evidence. They will unpack the evidence and engage with it at that point. Also, we do have situations where we engage with policymakers and tell them it's quite a controversial topic. Probably if you made this policy, they will receive a lot of pushback because I don't think the evidence appreciates the lived experience of the people who live that. And we do bring these people, normal people living their daily lives, and we're really not asking for their representation of voices, but we're asking for their lived experience there to see what does this mean, how does the evidence then correlate with what they're telling us, and we're able to then put that together and get the policymaker to appreciate. And sometimes, and not even sometimes, quite often when we do that, policymakers tell us, invite me to those engagements. I want to be there. I want to listen to these people talk about it. And it's really been very revealing for policymakers. And quite a number of times they have changed the direction they have taken. They would have taken when they're in those rooms.
Wonderful. Jan.
Yeah, I just wanted to use the opportunity to highlight a little bit again, the aspects of co-production that have also, become very, very clear here. But I think it's maybe good to also, frame this a little bit or demonstrate this a little bit in the context of the IPCC, because there, you have your summary for policymaker, where actually in the end, sentence by sentence, like a scientific document is then basically approved in collaboration with policymakers. And I think it's really not used so often, co-production, in the context of the IPCC. And I think, but it's the fundamental reason why IPCC reports are so powerful, because at the end of the day, once people have accepted this as a main input to the international climate negotiations, has already agreement of all governments in the world. And I think that makes it so difficult. This is why also IPCC approval plenaries become longer and longer. But it's also what it makes it fascinating. But that's obviously true across, far beyond the IPCC. And it reminds us, even though it's very, very nice for us as scientists just to do whatever we like and think about what we believe are the big questions, but we have to realize that often we are all delivering the same evidence, and there are areas where we hardly have any evidence that is really, really needed by policymakers. Something that I experience very often when we talk about what works questions, where you have, for example, a lot of evidence on carbon pricing, very few studies on other policy instruments. And this is something that is mainly driven, by our interest in science. And, this kind of, I think we are all benefiting, even in pushing out the boundaries of our knowledge, if we talk more to each other. And so just wanted to use this opportunity to highlight the importance of this.
Wonderful. Daniela.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I have to come in here because Jan, just for clarification, that there's no misunderstanding in the audience here. The synthesis for policy, the report for policymakers is not co-produced. It is approved, but the content is a scientifically collected synthesis. There's no co-production in it. It is an approved document, but it is not a co-produced document. And I think that's really important because, I mean, in the plenary, I know, I've been also in the plenaries, we go sentence by sentence, and we agree sentence by sentence, but the content will not be changed because of political interference. And I think that, just to clarify, the word co-produced, I do think is a bit misleading here. It is an approved document. So that's why I would be very careful with the word co-production. And I'm sure you meant it correctly, but I just wanted to make sure of this.
Go ahead, Jan, and then we'll take a question from the audience.
No, I have to disagree here because I really, and I think controversy is good, and I think fundamentally we agree. But I still say if jointly sentences are changed, in collaboration with governments during an approval process, I think that's a change. Even if contents are taken out because governments cannot agree that they can approve the sentence, that's in the end part of a co-production. I think the point is that co-production has very clear rules. It needs to be based on the underlying report, and this cannot be changed. So if, just for simplification, if the report says the tree is green and then governments want to say no, the tree is blue, that's not possible, and scientists have the last say. And I think that's, but I think it's, maybe it's a matter of wording, but I think it's actually a great thing that Bert Bolin has actually created, an interface where we can actually work together based on very clear rules that actually, because I think we fundamentally agree in a process that secures scientific integrity. And I think that's the important bit, and I leave it there, sorry.
Dina. You're on mute, Dina. Sorry.
That was a raise hand button that I pressed. No, I wanted to jump in. I know that we have other questions, but just to say that it is interesting to consider not only the response or the answer, but also the question as being co-produced. I mean, we see that a lot in at least environmental policy and ocean policy related developments, that the question is actually not co-produced, and therefore the answer is extremely difficult for instance, for scientists. If I give maritime strategy framework directive as an example of what is good environmental status, for example, you just determine, is it good or not? Then scientists are at a loss because we are missing data, we are missing time series, we are missing understanding of what is good and compared to what. And that's why co-production of questions, I think, is probably as relevant as co-production of answers.
Wonderful. I wonder if we could turn to the first question that we have, which is, could the speakers comment on what strategies or frameworks they have seen work well for integrating proactive foresight approaches into reactive evidence synthesis systems, especially in crisis or high-pressure policy contexts?
Shall I jump in?
Emily, please. You have great experience with this.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first thing is that it's a little bit something that I alluded to in my comments about the evidence synthesis being only part of a longer process. I think that proactive foresight approach, as is described here, is absolutely essential to enable you to be able to do a timely, rapid, reactive evidence synthesis. Just kind of reflecting on some of the conversation that we've just had, I thought Ismail's description of the dialogue that helps bring in that transdisciplinary perspective with a much wider range of voices is clearly really essential, especially on some, again, reflecting back onto some of the justice issues that I was raising as being, essential to integrate into this process. And so I'm really interested in hearing Ismail's experience of how to do that in a rapid way, because that fundamentally, a lot of that feels as though you need to have the time in order to be able to do it properly. And so I think one of the key challenges here is that we've almost got conflicting different priorities, and we've maybe again there was one of the comments that Ismail made at the start was I'm going to paraphrase, but it's don't let the perfect be the enemy, right? So we're not necessarily going to have perfect information, but how can we provide the best? Well, I guess this is IPCC terminology, in a sense, the best available evidence in order to be able to make that decision making. But how can we do that as well as we possibly can in this quite complicated environment?
Ismail, you get another question from your fellow.
Oh yeah, I think yes, definitely conflicts in sketches do happen, and part of what we do is we do negotiate with the policymakers on the time, especially when we do have overlapping requests, and that's really the practical part of that to manage the resources. But also when you're thinking about when situations do happen and how reactive you and proactive foresight has been mentioned. I'll give the example of COVID-19 when it was happening. You do get policymaker questions happening, but you know very soon you're going to have questions to do with vaccine hesitancy. So how that happens is that we do what we call horizon scanning. And this is done regularly. As we respond to policymakers, we have a group that continuously does horizon scanning. They will look at newspapers, they will look at bills in parliament that are coming through, they will look at, they'll really follow through the different platforms to see what are the conversations, but also where we are fortunate and we join in conversations with policymakers, and we've been fortunate on a number of occasions where we're invited in meetings. We do pick up these signals that are coming on different committees, and then we look up and say, look here, there is this that is happening. Questions. It's very likely that in a few weeks from now, we are going to have this question coming in, or given the situation that is coming in, that is ongoing. And the very key example is when a crisis is ongoing, because not all questions are going to come at the same time. But you would want for some of those questions to be reactive and be able to do that. So at that point, quite a number of those questions that we did respond to were proactive, and we were able to do that through the horizon scanning process that we did.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to the next question that we've been asked, which is about money. So how could research funding organizations support rapid evidence synthesis approaches or science advice in general? I think if you could keep it to rapid evidence synthesis, that would be great.
I mean, maybe I could just jump in. I mean, I think there is, and it's come up in a number of different ways in each of the presentations, there is some genuine methodological, there's some research questions about how to do this. And so I think the first way in which research funding organizations could support this would be by treating it as an academic endeavor to understand how to do this in the optimal way, including some of the things that I've raised and others have raised in terms of using AI and how best to do that in this context.
Daniela.
Yeah, I would like to go down to the very basic funding, and I fully agree, and I see the activities in the chat here. My experience shows that there's often lack of capacity, means funded staff to do something rapidly when it comes to science funding. So I see scientific funding on very medium to long-term horizons, but when it comes to have a quick answer within 3 months to do a mapping or whatever, either there must be already a team being established, or it goes on top of the scientists which are there anyway. So I think if that could be thought through, how rapid, and I'm really going for the rapid now and not for the living evidence, and I support all what has been said, but the rapid, I think, in scientific funding is quite difficult. But we need something like these rapid task force tools for synthesis. Synthesis cannot be done by 3 people when it's a multidisciplinary systemic problem. And we have to bring those together. They have to stop the work they're currently funded for, even if it's only 4 months or so. But that is difficult to organize. And I think there are funding schemes missing.
Dina, very, very quickly, because we're going to have to wrap this up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it is important to continue for scientific institutions and those who lobby to science funders, scientists, for example, to continue lobby for in economic terms. So we have, for example, OECD, who are interested in environmental economy and looking at, for instance, Ocean Economy 2050, the recent report. They give a very interesting ways of persuading funders why research funding is necessary. And in order to have rapid response, you need to have a baseline on which you are building the response. So you can't have only answers to your questions the moment you have the answer. You need to have science, observations, and research capacity constantly, systematically being supported. So yeah, that's just the point on thinking economy is also helpful for learning how to make your case.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to say 5 seconds. The IPCC has a workshop upcoming looking at this question of rapid evidence synthesis. Please contribute to that conversation. Lydia, I wonder if you could summarize and conclude this.
Thank you. Well, not summarizing, Eldred, because first of all, a big word of thanks to these fantastic panelists we had today. This has been a really eye-opener, and your views are I mean, very well noted, and we will keep working on that because I think this is a very nice way to pursue and to strengthen. I have heard some references to the long-term coordination needed, references to the possible role of funding organizations, a reference to the role of researchers in coordinating. And I like very much that, can't remember exactly who said, that we need the co-production of questions, but not the co-production of the answers, because they need to be faithful to science. And I think that is a very nice way of separating the roles of policymakers who will have to take some decisions, but the input that can be provided by science, which cannot be compromised for political processes. So I think I would leave it here just to say that we will continue working on this. We count on your collaboration. We will plan for a webinar in the framework of COP30, also deepening in this question. So you will be invited again, and we hope that we can count on you to co-develop the rapid evidence synthesis. So Eldred, back to you.
I think we're over time, but I did want to say a huge thanks to Diana, who's showing up on your screen there. And I look forward to continuing the conversation outside this webinar. Thank you so much to the speakers and to the audience.
Yes, thank you very much.